I watched almost every Monster Hunter Wilds review that came out, and I wanted to give my thoughts on a lot of the criticism I saw since I'm seeing a lot of dooming about the game which I find to be a little overblown. I'm seeing posts on the Monster Hunter Wilds subreddit about how people are leaving because of the overwhelming negativity that they're encountering on social media. I wanted to not only address the concerns, but also talk about how things could look in the future since launch is just the start. There were 6 issues that I saw common across most of the reviews. The impact of the open world on the social experience, the return to Monster Hunter World's co-op system, concerns about the game being too easy, the story-driven focus of Wilds, the new system that separates weapon and armor skills, and the performance issues. And I want to dive into all these things because while some are legitimately disappointing, it's not as bad as you think for the most part. It's important to keep in mind that almost every review I saw was overwhelmingly positive about the game. Now, let's start with the open world, and when I say open world, I really mean to focus on the choices and lack of things that you might expect because I believe that some sacrifices were made for the grand open world vision of Wilds. For me, one of the saddest parts about this is the lack of a housing system. Despite there being a capture net, there's nowhere to actually display the things that you capture. There's also not a home to customize. Nowhere to invite your friends over to show off your weapons plus all of the fun housing decorations that we could have earned. I can understand that a lot of hunters probably didn't care too much about the housing system in previous games, but I really loved it. To me, it was almost like the capstone of the endemic life system and world. Not only were you rewarded for finding the various creatures, but you could also show them off and have them living with you. This is especially notable when you had certain creatures that only showed up at different times of day. I was really excited to find out how this would work with the different weather systems in Wilds. It sounds like while there's still going to be plenty of endemic life around, we won't really have anything to do with them, which is disappointing to hear. The reason why I tie this to the open world is, I believe that Capcom didn't want to make a house or room for every single region. We don't have traditional hubs like Astera or Celiana, and it's not really clear to me where a house would have been if they wanted to add only one to the game. I was hoping that maybe the villages would have a place for us to stay, but I guess that didn't make sense to spend time developing. This is definitely a feature that I hope comes back in the updates. Another loss is kind of twofold, the Gathering Hub and the Canteen. The design of the open world in Wilds focuses on having these hubs in every region where you can have up to 100 players out and about. It's kind of the direction that we saw in Rise, where not only could you have people anywhere you want in Chimera Village, but in Sunbreak, you didn't even have a gathering hub because you had all the features in the town itself out in the open. Unlike Elgato Outpost, however, there's no canteen here. I know that we at least have the village meals, but I'm going to really miss seeing Palico's cooking, not to mention just sitting at the table with friends. And this leads into my next concern, and that's the seamlessness of the open world. We have so many different ways to eat between the village, the tent, and the portable grill. As far as I'm aware, you can do almost anything that you need to do from within the camp, aside from crafting armor and weapons. Despite having these 100-player hubs, it's going to be really easy to not need to be in them, and I think that's kind of awkward. I'm not expecting them to feel empty or anything, but I'm going to miss eating together with people at the very least. Part of the fun of the Gathering Hub was seeing all the hunters around you who are doing different things and going on quests. Hopefully the region hubs still have this charm, but I will miss having these elements around. Also, is Capcom really going to decorate every single region for seasonal events? I'm not sure if I expect them to, but I hope so. It just seems like a lot of work, and the Gathering Hub in Celiana was so gorgeous whenever events happened. So I hope that we don't lose that as well. Next up is the co-op system, and this one's really disappointing. All signs point to us being back to the Monster Hunter World system, where if you want to play the story with friends, you have to split up to look at the cutscene before joining back after the hunt has started. This is a lot of friction for no reason and something that we had fixed in Rise. I'll be honest though, I actually preferred having to go find the monster out in the field. There was an extra feeling of discovery there that Rise didn't have because it just showed you the picture and you saw the cutscene that didn't actually involve your hunter. I just wish that they had figured out a way to actually make a seamless experience where you don't have to leave your friends for every quest. Even in Iceborne, they actually had this sort of figured out. For Safi Jiva, Alatrana, and Fatalis, you would actually show up in your friends' cutscenes and your friends would show up in yours. I can understand that this would be maybe complicated for the full story, especially if they aren't designing cutscenes to work with multiple hunters. But a compromise could have been to at least allow the same cutscene to play for everyone at the same time. And then all you'd have to do is something like warp everyone to the hunt if one person found the monster before everybody else. That might sound a little jarring, but I think it would be better than having to leave entirely, go start the hunt individually, and then join up after it starts. So it's sad to see that there aren't any improvements in this area, and I hope that they fix this in updates as well, but I'm not that optimistic about this one. Now we get to difficulty, which is the biggest talking point, and one that I did make a separate full video on, but I want to cover it briefly here too, since it's definitely relevant. There are also some things that I've seen since I made that video, and I wanted to talk about those as well. A lot of reviews are saying that the game feels too easy, or at least easier than they'd like. While difficulty can be pretty subjective, I'd say that the overwhelming amount of reviews trend towards considering Wilds to be on the easier side, which kind of makes sense, especially with the huge story focus. They definitely want more and more players to get into the game. You have to remember that not everyone has put in hundreds or thousands of hours into Monster Hunter, and just like in World and Rise, there are going to be a ton of new players getting into the game. While there's some merit to the fact that your first game is always going to be the hardest, there are a lot of reasons why the game might feel easier to many. Your Sacred can pick you up off the ground without a cooldown, more weapons have access to counters with the new offset feature, there's greatly improved Palico AI, and the new wound system gives you constant staggers. I'm very curious to get my hands on the endgame to see how challenging some of those monsters feel, especially if Capcom is fast about adding things like Arc Temper fights. Just keep in mind that the story is only supposed to be around 10 to 15 hours long, so even if that part feels particularly easy, the rest of the game could feel a little bit different. And if there's a consistent trend to note, is that most of the reviewers aren't really allowed to talk about the endgame in detail, so try to keep that in mind. But I will note, one of the more interesting things was IGN's review. IGN's reviewer actually answered additional questions on Reddit about it, and they did say that their complaining about the lack of difficulty did include the endgame, even if they weren't allowed to discuss it in detail, so I'm kind of leaving the door open on that one. This comment from them paints a clearer picture. It's not that the monsters are easier, but that we have more powerful tools to deal with them than ever before. If our power goes up while the monsters stay the same, it's only natural that things are going to feel easier. Ultimately, I think that while I do expect a good chunk of the game to be on the easier side, I'm hoping that the fights are really fun, which I have heard from most of the reviews. I'm also expecting some pretty consistent updates to add new monsters and challenges to the game, just like we had in Sunbreak. So even if it's a little on the easier side at launch, I don't expect that to last. And that's before we get the eventual Master Rank expansion as well. In any case, try to take all of the difficulty claims with a grain of salt and wait until you actually get your hands on the game to see how it feels for yourself. Next up is the story. This is obviously one of the biggest focuses of Monster Hunter Wilds. The story has been a big deal in every trailer leading up to launch, and while I know that many people aren't playing Monster Hunter for the story, I do enjoy it and I really appreciate the lore and world building behind the scenes. It seems like most people found the story to just be okay and not amazing, but I have seen some people really enjoying it, especially having a fully voiced hunter. While I'm not expecting an incredible narrative, I'm hoping that it really establishes our reason for being here and serves to make the Forbidden Lands feel like an interesting and mysterious place, just like Monster Hunter World with the New World and the Guiding Lands. It also sounds like the ending has some mixed takes. I'm curious if the story is something that continues well into the updates, kinda like what happened with Monster Hunter Rise. While I don't mind having a story continuation, I do hope that the ending in base game feels like a proper finale in any case. I've also seen that the game has quite a few moments where we're blocked out of exploring, and in some cases not even allowed to hop off the Sacred. This isn't super appealing, but I can understand not wanting us to find every part of the map before we actually have a reason to be there. And like I said earlier, the story is only 10 to 15 hours long, which is a small fraction of the time that we'll be spending with the game anyway, so it's not that big of a deal if they want to guide the experience a bit. To me, I'm actually glad that they're doing this because I think that there's a lot of room for something interesting here. Even if the story doesn't knock it out of the park, they're only going to get better by trying, and that's exactly what they're doing. And now let's talk about the skill system. This is a huge shift in how skills work because now we have a lot of the damage focused skills only appearing on weapons. You won't find things like attack boost and critical eye on armor pieces anymore. Some people seem concerned about this, but I'm optimistic because Monster Hunter had a lot of over-centralizing skills sometimes. Things like attack boost 7 and crit eye 7 in Monster Hunter World were very common. I felt like there wasn't much variety with everyone trying to fit in these skills before looking at anything else. Between this and trying to find a way for armor sets to work with 2 weapons at once, I think it makes sense that they wanted to take a lot of the weapon-specific skills and put them on the weapons themselves. Personally, I'm a comfort skill enjoyer, so having a system where I actually have a lot of room to add those skills without getting in the way of my damage seems kind of nice to me, and it might actually give the weapons some fun identities, instead of just being a matter of which has the best raw stats. And if it doesn't work out, I expect them to go back to the drawing board in the expansion anyway, so I'm willing to give it a try. I will note that this probably also plays into why some of the hunts might feel easier than normal, because you'll actually have room to fit those comfort skills that you might not have been using in World of Rise. And last but definitely not least, we get to talk about performance. This one's kind of tough to discuss because I just hope that everything's okay and that it runs well for you. The benchmark is supposed to give us an idea of how the game is going to run, but from what I can tell, people have a very mixed experience even in the full build. You do have to keep in mind that the full review build doesn't include the inevitable Day 1 patch, as well as any Wild-specific driver updates that are going to be released by Nvidia and AMD. Between that and continuous performance updates that I expect to come out, I do hope that the game runs well on as many systems as possible. I definitely upgraded my computer because I was worried, and I know a lot of people are doing the same. I just hope that most hunters aren't gated because the computer is a little too old. Not to mention, some people won't even buy the game if they can't run it. And if they have trouble, they're just going to refund it. So at the very least, I'm optimistic that for a game that's going to sell as much as this game definitely will, Capcom is going to care a lot about improving performance over time. And that's everything. Like I mentioned at the start, some of these things are concerning, but for the most part, every reviewer was pretty positive about the game overall. My goal in discussing these things is to 1. Give people a little hope, 2. Calm things down because I don't want people to focus too hard on the negatives, and 3. Hopefully shine some light on how most of these things can be improved over time. I think that if you go into Monster Hunter Wilds looking for things to be upset about, you're just going to disappoint yourself and you're going to miss a lot of the fun that you could be having. Yes, there are valid concerns to have, but there are so many more positives to experience together with everyone, and I hope that each and every one of you can find these on release and throughout the many years that we'll be playing this game. Anyway, if you enjoyed this video, subscribe, join the Discord, and I'll see you in the next one.